New York is about building the tallest building and then coming back and building a taller building. New York is about when they knock you on your rear end, coming back stronger than ever before and building a Freedom Tower bigger and better than ever before. What made New York, New York was telling you how we're going to do what was never done before. That's what New York is all about.
New York City became New York City because we were very early on thoughtful about building an underground public transport. Second Avenue subway is an incredible, important investment in the future of the city of New York. The east side of Manhattan has been neglected for many, many years. We used to have an elevated Second Avenue that was taken down and it was never rebuilt. So the east side of Manhattan has never been served well by public transport.
Second Avenue subway was first on the table in 1920. In 1929, it seemed that the city was going to build it. They put a plan and a budget in place, and then the stock market crashed and the economy pretty much cratered. And then by the end of the decade, as the economy recovered, it looked like they would start building it again. And then in 1939, just as construction was about to get started, World War II broke out.
At the time, city leaders thought that elevators were dirty, noisy, prevented light from coming down to the street, and really discouraged redevelopment and lowered property values. So they began replacing elevators with faster, higher capacity subway lines. On the east side, the Ls were torn down before the subway was built, which left a large transit gap. In 1940, you had 3 rapid transit lines on the east side of Manhattan. By 1960, you were down to just 1, the Lexington Avenue subway.
As 1950 rolled around, and the U.S. was involved in the Korean War, planning and construction drove up costs well beyond the initial estimate. In 1951, the city voted on a huge bond issue for subway construction. And the idea was that construction would start on this project by the end of the decade. In 1957, it became clear that wouldn't happen. And the city had to use this money to fund subway repairs. In the early 1960s, it seemed that the federal government was finally ready to get into the game. So in 1968, the newly created MTA applied for federal funding for the Second Avenue subway. They got it, and by 1972, construction finally started. It looked like this project, after 50 years, would finally happen. By 1975, the city's economy was a complete wreck, so they halted construction. They built various segments throughout Manhattan, some downtown, some uptown, some that are going to be used finally. But the project, again, ended up on the shelf. It took a very long time for the city to recover.
The decay of our existing system, which had to come first, and I think in the 70s and 80s, a realization that we were not in a position to be expanding the system until we got control of the system we already had. By the 90s, it became clear that we still have a lot of work to do to get to a full state of good repair, but we could no longer be ignoring some of the critical expansion needs.
So in 1995, they started the new process to conduct the environmental review. That process takes a few years. It's time-consuming. There's a lot of work that goes into it. By the early 2000s, that was completed, and the Fed said that they would fund the project. In 2006, the money came, and construction started in the spring of 2007.
The main objective of building Second Avenue subway this time was to build an operating segment with the funding that is available. We decided to divide this project into 4 separate phases. Phase 1 of the project, which runs from 96th Street to 63rd Street. The reason that Phase 1 was selected is because of its connectivity to the existing system.
We're extending the Q train up 2nd Avenue to 96th Street. 200,000 people a day will use this new 2nd Avenue subway line. Phase 1 of the subway will take 25,000 people off the Lexington Avenue line every weekday and reduce crowding there by as much as 13%. So our customers will benefit from 2nd Avenue subway even if they never ride it. But of course we hope they do.
The excavation of Second Avenue subway is one of the most complex projects you could be on. It's a collaboration of lots of people that bring in various expertise to the table. It doesn't happen overnight, it doesn't happen by default. There's a lot of planning, a lot of efforts, and a lot of energy that goes into making a tunnel.
First decision you have to make is, how am I going to excavate the rock? And the decision here was to use a tunnel boring machine.
So in the old days, we had to shut down Second Avenue, and we have excavated the street back then. It's quite disruptive to the neighborhood, quite disruptive to the people who work in the area. The tunnel boring machine allows us to make a small, very localized area of work, lower the machine and work underground, undetected. We worked about 30, 40 blocks of 94th Street all the way down to 63rd Street. People had no idea that there's this monster of a big machine, and is drilling and making a huge tunnel right in front of their doorsteps without them even knowing about it.
The Manhattan schist is a hard rock, but it's a tricky rock. It has a lot of faults in it, it has a lot of seams, and you have to watch it carefully as you mine. Because on any job, when you're underground, you don't know what you're going to have. When the tunnel boring machine work was done, then the next step was to do the excavation of the station caverns. Those are taken out sequentially by drilling, blasting, supporting the ground.
The biggest accomplishments were to be able to blast a cavern next to buildings where people live and minimize the disruption to the community.
The fact that we had over 200 fragile buildings along the corridor, and we were going to be doing blasting within close proximity, causing vibration. We entered into agreements with those building owners and went in and reinforced buildings as needed in advance of our work.
It's like a puzzle that you're putting together. You have all these mechanical systems, you got the electrical systems, you got the plumbing systems, you got the waterproofing systems, you have the architectural systems. All of them have to work in unison for the station to work.
We recognize the population of the city is growing. And so we want to make sure that we're building with an eye toward the future. The stations on Second Avenue are large, they're high capacity stations, and the architecture is going to be really nice.
And as part of the design was the creation of a new station design guidelines. And that process, that will become the future of designing a new station in New York City.
It begins with the architects. They need to create the space within the station.
We're working on stations, we're working on entrances, we're working on ancillary buildings. Each of these items of design are presented to the community. They have an opportunity to give their feedback, and to the extent possible, we incorporate that feedback.
In the museum, we expect to see art. In a subway station, you may be surprised by it. As a whole, there are over 36 characters. Some of them are interacting, some of them are by themselves. But I think it's a good gamma of New York types and people probably out of town, people who you would expect to find in a train station, but not as an artwork.
My thinking was I wanted mosaics upstairs to reflect the ridership in the cars below. Old people, young people, baby. But the other thing was I wanted to do as much as possible, each piece in a different methodology.
You know, I'm a real true believer in art in public space, and this is why I do the work I do. Before there was a subway station, there was the elevated, and I really wanted to bring those conversations together as the contemporary commuter goes into the subway, and that they have an understanding of what was present before and what's absent now. The piece is very integrated to the design of the subway station, and so we worked very closely with the design to try to place it in appropriate places.
What's really exciting to me about this project is this idea that the entire subway station can become an immersive experience. This idea that I could do every entranceway and the mezzanine level as well, and that the work could unfold over your movement through the station was this incredible opportunity. And so to figure out how that would work was a great technical feat.
New York government was, let me tell you about the solutions. And let me tell you how we're going to do it faster and better than ever before. That's what New York is at its best.
And the governor said it's important to change the perception the public has of the MTA. It's his leadership and vision, and let's be honest for all of us who were involved in this, his direct challenge to us to complete this project on time.
And that's what the MTA is saying when they're saying we're going to get this 2nd Avenue subway built. It's going to be better than any subway system ever built before. And even though there have been all these delays, we're going to get it done on time. It's going to remind New Yorkers that this is the greatest state in the United States of America. We don't make excuses. We make the impossible happen. That's who we are. That's what we believe. That's what organized labor did. That's what the carpenters did. And that's what the TWU did. And we're going to run these trains on January 1. And we're going to remind New Yorkers that there is nothing that we cannot do in this state when we put our mind to it. And we're not going to take no for an answer. We're going to show you how dreams become a reality. Be here New Year's Eve, be here New Year's Day, and let's start the new year the right way. Thank you and God bless you.